and I wanted to call your attention to them because they're not exactly a reproduction of this particular webinar. Each one has a different theme with different panelists. On March 24 from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have one on research at McGill in the Faculty of Arts, where we will also have a couple of students and a couple of profs presenting their research and research opportunities in the Faculty of Arts. On April 14th, noon to 1 p.m., we'll have a roundtable about studying and teaching at McGill. We'll have, again, 2 faculty members and 2 students participating at roundtable, talking about the experience of taking classes at McGill, of teaching at McGill, of interaction between students and profs. We also have an in-person meeting or event, a big event, called Meet McGill, which is on April 26th at 4 p.m. If you're around Montreal, that would be great if you can attend. And now, yes, Erin, sorry for the false alarm, but here we go, okay?
It's all good. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you this morning. Thanks for making the time to come out. So this, I need to set my timer. So this mini lecture is from a course that I teach most years called The Art of Theatre, and it's aimed at incoming and first-year students. The goal of the course is to introduce students to theatre as a collaborative art and to build skills in engaging theatre analytically. So before I dive into this mini lecture, I have 2 questions for you, and I'll ask you to just raise your hands on the Zoom, and this will help me orient myself to you all. So the first question is, who has any connection to theatre? By this I mean you might have done it in high school, or you've attended a theatre production, or you've read a play. Okay, well, welcome everyone to the world of theatre. You're going to hear about it for the next 10 minutes. Here's maybe an easier question. Who among you has watched the US sitcom Friends? Okay, I've got a couple. Great. Okay, that's going to come in later. Thank you very much. All right, here we go. Slide, please, Manuel. So where we begin in this course, and where we're beginning today in this mini lecture, is with the definitional question of what is theatre, right? So when you think about what is theatre, just take a moment to think about what images come up in your mind. It might be an image like the one that's on your screen currently, with the plush red seats at a fancy theatre house. Slide, please. Often we think of theatre as a place, right? So this is our actual theatre in the Faculty of Arts. It's called Moyes Hall. It's a 306-seat proscenium arch theatre. It has the fancy red curtain and the slightly less fancy plush seats. So theatre is a place. It's a meeting place, right? It's a meeting place where people come together to see some kind of aesthetic object unfold in front of them. Slide. This is the Théâtre Maisonneuve, another Montreal house. I've selected this slide because this shows a kind of traditional Western contemporary relationship in theatre between the stage and the audience. So you see the stage is lighted. That tells us this is where we're supposed to focus our attention. The stage is also the center of activity. Things are happening on the stage. The audience, by contrast, or the house, is in the dark. Right? They're sitting, they're all facing the same direction, and they're sitting relatively passively in relation to the activity on stage. Slide. So this brings us to our next point. So if theatre is a place or is a noun, it's also a verb, right? Theatre's an activity. One does theatre, one makes theatre, one goes to theatre. These are images of our students in the Department of English, Drama and Theatre program in productions on that Moyes Hall stage. So this is of them doing theatre here. They're on stage. These are performances in the space. And Manuel, if you'll forward the slide. Here's some backstage work. So this is the same, another set of students building a set on stage. And one more slide, please. And here's an image of our costume shop where the costumes that the students wear on the stage are designed and built. So theatre is an activity, one that brings together a bunch of different artists, right? So actors, directors, designers, costumes, sets, lights, sound, etc. All right. And yet, so this is one sense of theatre, right? What we understand to be theatre in 21st century Canada / North America / the West, like the images I've just showed you, has, of course, not always been the definition of theater, and neither is it the universal definition of theater, even in this contemporary moment. So we might then ask a more focused question, right? One that takes more account of context and of variability across time and space in this aesthetic form. So what is theater then in different periods and places? Slide. Is it a stock character? Here, this is Il Dottore, who is the learned person or the professor, chosen expressly for this. So is it a stock character who's extemporizing a comic scene on a raised platform, the trestle stage that you see, in a public square in Renaissance Italy? This is the Commedia dell'arte from Renaissance Italy. Slide, please. Is theater rather a masked performance of chanting and very precise choreography that is handed down across generations since the Middle Ages? This is an example of Japanese no drama. Slide. Is theater here an entrance by a 12-foot tall or 6.5 meter tall girl puppet into a European city? This is Little Amal. I'm going to take a minute to introduce you to her because she's going to come back in a moment. She is meant to be a 10-year-old Syrian refugee created by Handspring Puppet Company in 2021 for a performance called The Walk. And here she's walking through the town of Canterbury, England, followed by hundreds of members of the public and school children. She walked, Little Amal did, across Europe from the border of Syria in Turkey to England over 6 months. That's 5,000 miles. So is this theater, right? Again, this context question. So these last three examples have maybe only proliferated the definition of theater, right? So let's maybe try another approach to this question of what is theater. Perhaps turning to theater's purpose, right? Its function, what it can do, will elucidate the issue of what theater is, or at least what it's for. Next slide, please, Manuel. So I'm going to give you three sample definitions of what theater does, right, of its function. The first is from the 5th century BCE, so ancient Greece, and it comes from, each of these definitions come from a theater theorist, philosopher, in this case, Aristotle, who wrote a treatise called the Poetics, in which he says that theater is the imitation of an action. So theater, he says, is a mimetic or imitative art. What it's meant to do is reflect a reality that exists, right? Hold as 'twere a mirror up to nature, says Hamlet in that play, in Hamlet. So theater is meant to reflect an existing reality, but as it's filtered through a dramatist's imagination, right? So for the ancient Greeks, that reality could be a mythological one or an historical one. The ancient Greeks, as you may know, if you've read Oedipus or Medea, rework classical myths, take on classical, mythological, and historical characters like Medea, like Oedipus. So theater in this rubric, for this purpose, has a social function. In reflecting our reality, it's meant to show us something about ourselves and our social situations that we may not otherwise perceive in the flow and activity and hubbub of everyday life, right? This kind of theater asks us to take a step back and consider how our world is organized, run, and experienced. Slide. A second purpose of theater is expressed by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, an early 19th century German playwright, poet, and theorist, who says that theater isn't so much a mirror as it is a lamp, right? That theater is rather the expression of a mind or a soul, an esprit, as we'd say in French, right? So in his prologue for the theater, Goethe writes, "What in the spirit's depths was there created, what shyly there the lip shaped forth in sound." So again, this is an expressive model of taking what is inside, emotional, spiritual, that is shared commonly, is the presumption, among humans, and that the artist, genius, right, will elevate this common emotional experience, incohate emotional experience, into art. They're going to tap into qualities and put them into dramatic form. So this has a personal or a humanist function. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the third function is articulated by another German, a 20th century German playwright, poet, and theorist, Bertolt Brecht, who says theater is not a mirror. Neither is it a lamp. Theater should be a bullhorn. It is activist. It is a call to action. It shouldn't just reflect the reality we live or express an internal reality that we share, but it can alter reality. It can make changes by exposing the conditions within which we live and work, and by challenging us expressly in the drama to take a position on those conditions. Right? So this kind of theater is going to highlight character choices and ask audiences, what other choices could those characters make? So here for Brecht, theater has an expressly political function. Slide, please. So we've seen these three different purposes, but in each of them, the theater shapes the raw material of the world, right? Regardless of purpose, in order to present it to us. The events, people, myths are shaped into story and into heightened aesthetic experience. Theater then, as you see on the slide here, is a framing of experience in its making of story, in its architecture, in its use of time and space. So let me give you a couple of examples. So first, theater sets something apart, right? In the activity of going to the theater doesn't generally arrive at your house. You have to go out, you buy a ticket, you sit down, it's an outing. So already that is set apart from everyday life. But also in the theater itself, here you're seeing another proscenium arch stage by means of the theatrical apparatus. You're looking at a stage which is framed, right? So set apart from our everyday life. Slide, please. If we return briefly to Aristotle, he says that theater is the imitation of an action, yes, but an imitation of an action of a certain magnitude and wholeness, which means, again, drama does something with the raw material of everyday life to turn it into something else. It turns into whole and complete narrative. It makes action out of movement. It makes a kind of cosmic sense out of the everyday, right? How does it do this? It does this through shaping time and space, in the first instance, and also by using conventions or rules that are often tacit. So first, slide please, how it shapes time. And here we're back with Little Amal, and I know I have a minute left. Here's Little Amal. Her story, her theater is she enters a city, she's welcomed by the city, she leaves the city. That's the whole drama, okay? So here she is, and that's beginning, middle, and end. So here is Little Amal entering Marseille, as it happens. This is a theatrical entrance because of the scale of Amal, right? She's 3.5 meters tall. You can't not notice her. She's a giant puppet walking through your city. Amir Nizar Zubai, the project's artistic director, says that Little Amal is 3.5 meters tall because we want the world to grow big enough to greet her. Slide. Here is Little Amal being welcomed in Geneva with a mini concert. Slide. Here is Amal's initial departure, which starts the performance, leaving from Turkey in 2021. So again, this portion says theater shapes the raw material of the world into something purposeful and meaningful by creating these beginnings, middles, and ends. And the last point is that theater also does this, creates something meaningful and purposeful out of the flow of everyday life through convention. Slide, please. Rules of the game that establish the play world as different from the one we inhabit. So this is where the Friends example comes in. I won't work all the way through it because we're out of time. But the point is that even something like Friends, which looks like reality, right, is that kind of imitation mirror reality, is also very much not reality. So if I had more time, I would say to you, what are some of the rules of the Friends universe? How do you know that Friends is Friends and Friends is not some other TV show, Grey's Anatomy, for example, or your everyday life? I will give you a couple of examples and then I will stop. Friends is not reality. Friends rules include that the Friends live in palatial New York City apartments, but they never appear to actually work or generate any income. New York City in the 90s and 2000s is oddly devoid of all BIPOC people. The Friends will always be friends, but also they will end up with each other as life partners. The Friends will only have token other friends, right? These are a set of rules. The couch in the cafe is always available for them, despite New York City being New York City. These are rules, these are conventions, right? Which create that world as its own space and is different from ours. Okay, I'm stopping here. I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Erin. Okay, so now let me run through the rest. Now let me introduce you to Jake Blanc. Jake, floor is all yours.
Um, all right. Thanks, Manuel, for organizing this. Thanks, everyone, for attending. As Manuel said, my name's Jake Blanc. I'm a professor with a joint appointment, half in history and half in international development studies. So what I thought I would do today is give a little kind of a mini overview that kind of merges those two worlds, at least for me. It gives a bit of an indication of the types of courses that you'll all be able to take. So I'm a historian primarily of Brazil, primarily of Latin America. And as half historian, half scholar of development studies, what I do here in the Faculty of Arts is teach on the history of Latin America and also on memory and memory studies. So what I want to do today is give a little bit of a snapshot of a course that I teach that you all could take next fall. It'd be wonderful if you do. History 210, Introduction to Latin American History, but interspersed with a little bit of what I do in development studies in a course called Memory and Violence in Global Perspective. So what I'm going to try to do now is bridge a little bit the very kind of specific case study, context-rich example of Brazil, particularly Brazil's dictatorship, but then play with the ideas of, well, what happens when a period of violent authoritarian rule continues, right? Even if just symbolically and evil, even if just through social constructions, this question of memory. So we're looking at the legacies of dictatorship and violence. And particularly what I want us to talk about today is this question of amnesty. And amnesty is probably a word that you've all heard of, right? We think Amnesty International, this global NGO that works for social justice and human rights, right? Amnesty is often coded as a very positive word, right? It is an aspirational phrase to get us to imagine a better future. And what we're going to be looking at today is very much included in that. But I also, like all scholars and all historians, I kind of want to complicate the trajectory that particular understandings of amnesty can mean, particularly when it has to do with histories of violence. Okay, so let's go through this. Slide, please, Manuel. Okay, so big picture, what is the context, right? Brazil was ruled by a military dictatorship between 1964 and 1985. Here we see several images on the left of the tanks originally on the first day of the coup, seizing control in Rio de Janeiro. In the middle, a book that was published about 4 years into the dictatorship, this kind of groundbreaking expose on some of the torture and political repression that was being done against captives and alleged subversives by the authoritarian regime against political prisoners, and then images as well of large-scale demonstrations demanding the return of democracy, the return of civilian rule. And Brazil's dictatorship would, like many across the Southern Cone and across Latin America and really globally during the period of the Cold War, have widespread violence. We're looking at examples of over 500 people killed by the dictatorship, thousands tortured, tens of thousands forced into exile. So a period of mass disruption and authoritarian violence. Slide, please, Manuel. So skipping to the second half of the dictatorship, and a lot happened in the first half too, but for the sake of time, now we're going to go ahead to the second half when we see a return of civil opposition. And what I mean by civil opposition is the sense of not political parties challenging the dictatorship, not armed militants. And there were examples of revolutionaries who went underground, kind of think guerrilla warfare type strategies, trying to push back against the regime, right? By civil opposition, we mean essentially normal people who are taking a stand against the dictatorship. And in Brazil, this really happened from 1973 onwards, after the most repressive period of Brazil's violence started to wane a little bit. And the first return of civil opposition galvanized around the question of torture, right? Brazil at this time was publicly stating that it did not torture anyone in Brazil. And so there's this large campaign led by certain sectors of the Catholic Church in coordination with international groups like Amnesty International to essentially bring attention, right? To shine a spotlight on the abuses that Brazil's dictatorship was doing, very much around the question of torture, right? So this is the first main galvanizing force. And then what will really define the second half of Brazil's dictatorship is this question of amnesty, right? Okay, this is the word I started talking about today. Amnesty at this moment in Brazilian history was the need to return political rights to politicians and professors and members of the army who were deemed subversives and were essentially kicked out of their positions. initially when the Brazilian dictatorship took power. So on the one hand, it meant returning political rights, allowing people to resume their offices. And on the other hand, amnesty would be allowing exiles to return, right? That basically saying any of the tens of thousands of Brazilians who had either gone overseas for fear of their own lives or been forced abroad by the dictatorship would be allowed to be back in Brazil with no fear of repercussions. And initially, the movement for amnesty, as we see here in this image, is the Movimento Feminino pela Anistia, so the women's amnesty movement. And it was primarily led by the wives of persecuted politicians and lawyers and professors. So initially, we have this very kind of feminized space playing on the kind of gendered tropes of women as mothers and caretakers for the nation, kind of selflessly fighting to return harmony to their country. With time, larger sectors of civil opposition would also tap into this demand for amnesty. And this revolved around a phrase that was amnesty that would be wide, general, and unrestricted, basically saying, let everybody back into Brazil, let their political rights return. Next slide, please, Manuel. Okay, and so here are some images of this growing movement for amnesty. On the left, it says amnesty, the wide, general, and unrestricted. And on the right, it says amnesty for all prisoners and political exiles. So very clearly what this demand is for. Next slide, please. And this will actually come to a head in many ways quite successfully in 1979, where there's this very heated debate amongst politicians with very heavy hand from the military dictatorship about kind of where the levers of power are going to be pulled. And eventually what does get passed is this kind of fundamental and kind of precedent-setting law called the 1979 Amnesty Law. Importantly, for all the civil opposition that we just saw, it allows exiles to return and reinstates political rights. But, and so often with history, there is a but here, right? What is the compromise? Why would the dictatorship allow this when it is still in power? Amnesty also meant a blanket pardon for state perpetrators of human rights abuses. Right, so remember, we talked about over 500 people disappeared, thousands tortured, brutally tortured. What do we do then with this question of human rights abuses at a time when so much of civil opposition is, on the one hand, clamoring for the return of political rights and exiles, but then also clamoring for the return of democracy, saying, okay, we want Brazil to move forward. We want the dictatorship to end. And the dictatorship essentially says, sure, we'll allow exiles to return. We'll allow those professors and lawyers and politicians to get back into their jobs. But the only chance that we will allow for us to eventually hand over power back to democratic rule is to put in place this law that will mean that we will never be able to be investigated and then persecuted for human rights abuses. Next slide, please. So this question of amnesty basically creates a culture of impunity where through this negotiated transition, where it was not the Brazilian dictatorship collapsing like it would have in a place like Argentina, nod to Manuel, or in some other instances in Latin America where you did see dictatorships end by armed militants on the ground overthrowing them. Instead, we have this negotiated, pacted transition to power, and through which the dictatorship was essentially able to determine the stakes of that transition. And this question of amnesty became fundamental. And this is a very complicated situation, right? Because in a lot of ways, for a country to be able to move on, in some ways, do you just forgive and forget? Do you move forward, right? To move past a violent 21-year dictatorship is a challenging, very complex process. But what we can do now with the few minutes that we have remaining is actually think about the implications for a country in what scholars call the process of transitional justice, right? Attempting to reckon and reconcile with a period of violent rule with the fact that if an amnesty law exists and there is no ability for trials or human rights accountability to process, well, what does that mean for society grappling with this very violent and complicated history? And there were several moments over the subsequent decades where amnesty was reinforced. Brazil created a new constitution in 1988 that then, through much debate, did not touch the question of amnesty, meaning that the 1979 law remained on the books. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s and even into the 2010s, there was constant social movements to try to overturn the amnesty law, saying essentially that, okay, the initial amnesty of allowing exiles to return and allowing persecuted politicians to get their rights, that was important, but actually the deeper need for Brazil is to have accountability for those who had committed horrible human rights atrocities. Finally, this will galvanize somewhat around a campaign for a National Truth Commission, which, as we'll see in just a second, was Brazil's largest effort to date to reckon with its violent past, although there was no legal mechanisms for anything around trials or legal accountability. And even in 2010, the Brazilian Supreme Court ruled 10-2 to uphold the amnesty law. Here, meaning that legally, time and again, the amnesty law has been maintained. Next slide, please, Manuel. So Brazil, as I mentioned, did eventually have a truth commission, but it was the last nation in Latin America to have its truth commission, coming several decades after the end of military rule, where, as we see on this chart, several of its neighbors in South America had their Truth Commission reports almost immediately after the return of civilian rule. And quite importantly, here we see that Brazil, compared to elsewhere in the region, had very few recommendations put into the Truth Commission, and almost none of them were actually implemented. Which is not to take away from the power of the Truth Commission. It was a fact-finding mission, large investigations around the country, the first effort to really establish a new narrative about what this meant. But because of the amnesty law in place, the military had no legal requirement to participate in the Truth Commission. And often they stonewalled, they denied access to archives. So it was a very kind of, we'll say, partial Truth Commission. And then the fact that there was no accountability, right? And this creates this larger question. What does memory look like within a culture of impunity, right? Is memory itself the only form of justice that survivors and family members of those who've been killed and tortured can have when there's no hope of seeing the torturer or the murderer within the Brazilian authorities actually stand trial and potentially go to jail? Next slide, please, Manuel. So here's an image of the signing of the final Truth Commission report in 2014. And the woman that you see here in the middle with kind of the diagonal striped shirt is President Dilma Rousseff, who was the president at the time of Brazil in 2014. And Dilma herself had been a militant during the period of dictatorship. She had gone underground as part of one of several armed groups to fight against the dictatorship. She was eventually captured and brutally tortured herself as a political prisoner. So the question of her rise as the eventual president of Brazil also brings in these questions of memory and how there are efforts, even within a culture of impunity, to advance Brazil's narrative about reckoning with its own history. These, like all processes of history, are not linear, right? Manuel, next slide, please. So here's an image. We can see, okay, Brazil has a truth commission. Things are moving forward, growing culture of human rights. Everything is capable of shifting again, depending on the political whims of the moment. So the image that we see here on the left is of Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, who was in power from 2018 to 2022. And here was an image of him from before he became president, where he is holding up a book written by an officer in the Brazilian army during the dictatorship, a man named Brilhante Ustra, who was the person to have personally tortured Dilma Rousseff when she was a prisoner. And so here we see Bolsonaro, a right-wing politician, an apologist for the military dictatorship. And when he actually went to cast his vote to impeach Dilma for a different political history that we can talk about another time, he dedicated his vote against Dilma to the memory of the man who had tortured her, right? So invoking this still ongoing contested history of what Brazil's dictatorship meant in a way to again victimize this woman, Dilma Rousseff. And this question, in part because this ongoing culture of impunity means that Brazil has never fully reckoned with its past, right? It has put nobody on trial. There's been no accountability, no guilt, no guilty verdict rendered, we get these types of continuing narratives where people can look positively back on a period of very violent military rule. And the image here that we see on the right is, again, of these protests, these pro-Bolsonaro protests saying, SOS, armed forces, save Brazil, right? Actually wanting the armed forces to come back again here now in the 2020s to, again, save Brazil, much as it had in 1964 against what at the time was this threat of kind of communist plotting subversion, right? So one of the things that we do in my classes, right, we kind of complicate it, right? Why is it that questions of memory and history are so fuzzy? How is it that so many members within the same society, within the same nation, can look back on one event with the widely diverging views upon that, not only for the sake of history itself, but also in contemporary moments? And just one final slide, please, Manuel. Okay, well, these questions remain ongoing from lots of different perspectives. If any of you have been following the Oscars this year, you will have seen that the Academy Award for Best International Feature went to a Brazilian movie for the first time. I'm Still Here, Ainda Estou Aqui, this wonderful movie that really places at the center this unfulfilled understanding of Brazil's dictatorship and what the memory and legacies mean for those who had been victimized. And it tells the story of the Paiva family, really of this woman that you see here, played by Fernanda Montonera, playing the historical figure of Eunice Paiva, whose husband, Rubens Paiva, had been disappeared by the dictatorship in the 1970s. And it's this back and forth film between the 1970s and the 2020s, showing this interplay between history and memory, and all of which, as we kind of talked about today now, and we can discuss more at length afterwards, revolves around this question of amnesty, right? Which we started this mini lecture on with a kind of, quite superficial understanding of what amnesty as a notion, as a political mobilizer can mean. But we can see also here that when notions of amnesty extend to the extent that they do and remain unchallenged in even legal courts, to let alone on social opinion and kind of the court of public opinion, these types of memory wars continue. And they will continue surely for the foreseeable future, as long as they will. All right, well, thanks everybody. I look forward to any questions that we have afterwards.
Thanks, Jake. So let's go to our last presentation for today. Sophia Ishu, floor is all yours.
Hello, thank you so much. All right, so we are representatives from the AUS, also known as the Arts Undergraduate Society. And as soon as you enter into McGill in a Bachelor of Arts, you automatically become a part of the Arts Undergraduate Society. So we are a fully student-run nonprofit that represents all 8,600 plus students in the Faculty of Arts. And next slide, please. Aishu and I will be giving you a little background on what that looks like. So I'm Sophia. I'm in my final semester as a U3 Honors International Development major, and I minor in Social Entrepreneurship and African Studies. I hail from Vancouver and Toronto, so Montreal was naturally the last interesting Canadian city I hadn't been to yet. No offense to anyone from elsewhere. But coming to McGill for me, the big decision was really based on the culture of the city, the amount of research opportunities at McGill, and mostly that I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I wanted the chance to be able to explore a ton of different disciplines. If you had asked me 4 years ago, I definitely would not have said I'm going into Honors International Development. So I've come a really long way, and it's been really amazing being a part of the AUS, but also just being at McGill. And with that, I will pass it over to Aishu to introduce herself as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Aishu. I'm a third year in Honors Political Science with minors in South Asian Studies and Management. So I joined McGill from Bangor, Maine. As a student coming from the US, I wasn't exactly sure what to expect at McGill, the Canadian universities. I had heard about McGill through former classmates who were attending school. And so the more I explored McGill online, the course offerings, the learning environment, I was really drawn to the diverse aspects of McGill and the opportunity to explore kind of out of my comfort zone. I actually had my campus tour during a blizzard, and I still felt like there was something very special about McGill that I wouldn't find anywhere else. And in my first year, I found that there were so many ways to get involved, and those opportunities only kept growing as I progressed at McGill. I had heard about the AUS during Frosh. This is a first year orientation week planned by the AUS. And I thought it seemed like a cool opportunity to get involved, but really didn't think much of it. And it wasn't until I talked to people involved with the AUS that I realized it was really something that I wanted to do. So the first way that I got involved with AUS was I ran for arts representative to SSMU after my first year, in which I represented arts students in the larger council at SSMU. So I'll make sense in a few slides, but I'll just keep explaining my role at AUS. And so now I'm the current VP academic, which means I run student academic services like peer tutoring and the essay writing center. And I'm also the incoming president. So as you can see, AUS has been a big part of my student life at McGill, and I've made so many connections through it. And I really have found my home at McGill.
Next slide, please. Okay. Actually, Aishu, did you want to go ahead? Sorry.
So like I was talking about SMU, the Student Society of McGill University. So all undergraduates are members of SMU. They are the student union at McGill and manage the 250 clubs and services for all McGill students. There are so many ways to get involved in SMU, like joining a club. I got involved with Pre-Law Society, and I'm still involved to this day. They also plan social events. They offer services like Walk Safe, which is a student-run service, which if you're ever alone at night or feel unsafe during your walk home, you can call and a student volunteer will walk with you to your destination, and the Peer Support Center. And then, like Sophia has mentioned, the Arts Undergraduate Society, or AUS, is a student society for all art students, and we offer services, activities, employment opportunities, and much more for art students. And we also have a lounge and study space for art students that you can definitely visit and enjoy during your time at McGill.
Next slide, please. Okay, so at the AUS, our job is to oversee 32 departments. So every single one of the majors and minors under the Bachelor of Arts has their own student executive that runs a ton of activities and receives a budget from the AUS. So there's the AUS as a whole to get involved in, but then no matter what minor or major you choose, there will be a student group you can also get involved in. They hold 1,010 events over the years, wine and cheese nights, professor panels, career fairs, tutoring. There is no lack of opportunities with them. So it kind of helps you find a home within your major or minor as well. And then what's really cool is they all mostly also have their own student publications, which are open to McGill students. So as a student, no matter your year or what you've written or what major you're in, you're able to submit to these journals and have your work published and edited as well. Next slide, please.
And here are a few of the extracurriculars or ways that you can get involved with the AUS. So like I mentioned before, we have Frosh, which is first year orientation week. It is an opportunity to get involved with McGill. We'll show you around Montreal. You'll get to meet some upperclassmen. You'll get to meet other people in your faculty. So that's always been a fun time for incoming students. I have fond memories from Frosh. And another way to get involved is through, we also run our own student cafe. So basically, we employ students to be baristas, and then it's just a student-run cafe in Leacock, which is one of the arts buildings. We also have the Fine Arts Council, which is a way for you to get involved if you're interested in more creative passions. You can submit artwork. We host art galleries throughout the year. We also have our many career opportunities through the AUS. Including like graduation fairs, and job fairs, because I know it's a big thing. You're always looking for summer jobs, and AUS obviously has a lot of ways that we can help you find those jobs or graduation opportunities after McGill. We also have our Epic which is Event Planning Involvement Committee. So we plan social events for arts. One of those is Bar des Arts, which is the student-run bar. So there are definitely a lot of fun ways to get involved with McGill that aren't just, like more of the academic, but also the social aspects of McGill. Next slide, please.
Yes, so on the more academic side, we also work hard, play hard. So in terms of the AUS resources that you'll find as soon as you become enrolled as an arts student, we have a few different programs. So a big one being FIERCE, which is our first year involvement committee. So it allows a group of first years to take on leadership positions within the AUS, plan events, plan academic support for first years specifically. And then beyond that, we offer free essay writing center and a free peer tutoring for students all year round. We also offer department mentorship programs. So a lot of our independent departments will match you with an upperclassman so you can get to know your program as well as kind of some stuff around Montreal. And then finally, our kind of biggest associate that we work with is the Arts Internship Office, which helps place a number of students with internships over the summer, which are really hard to find, and it's really great that you're able to kind of have that direct link to them. And then on the funding side, we offer a ton of different funding for students as well. So we fund work study opportunities. So if you work on campus, you can get subsidized by us. We also have the Arts Student Employment Fund. So if you choose to work with a professor on some research, you can be funded by us as well. We have the Creative Initiatives Fund. So really any type of fine arts that you'd like to do can be funded as well. And then we have a number of special projects and journal funds. So in case none of our committees interest you, there are also other ways to receive funding and run your own events. And next slide, please. Yeah, so with that, we'll leave it open to everyone. But I think Aishu and I just wanted to share kind of our draw to McGill and the way our degrees have really been shaped by our time with the AUS, but also on the wider McGill campus. I definitely was very shy when I came into McGill. I did not expect to be in the position I am today. Just working at AUS has taught me a whole lot about working with teams. It's allowed me kind of to pop out of my bubble a lot more, but it's also shaped my interests and where I even decided to go after my undergrad. So I'll pass it on to Aishu for some final words, and then we are open to any questions.
Okay. Yeah, like Sophia said, I feel like there's really a place for everyone at McGill, and that's something that I've really discovered through my time here. Whether it's joining a smaller club, like we have a lot of different activities for you to get involved with, or joining the AUS, I really feel like you'll find your people here at McGill. And to this day, even though my family jokes that I went from Maine, which is already cold, to an even colder place, I have absolutely no regrets about going to McGill. It is probably one of the best decisions that I could have made. And reflecting on my time coming in as AUS president too, I am really excited to hopefully see you all at McGill and to keep continuing our services at McGill. And yeah, so I really feel like I can't stress this enough, how much I love McGill and how much I really am happy that I made the decision to go here. And yeah, we can't wait to see you on campus, hopefully.
Sure, I think we have a question in the chat too.
Yeah, you have a question on the chat. Let me read it out loud. Or unless Samara, you want to ask the question, you can unmute yourself and ask your own question. But if you're shy to do so, I'll read it for you. How's that?
Okay, no, that's okay. I can ask.
Great, go ahead.
Sorry, I just will not turn on my camera because it's quite late here. But I was just wondering, for Aishu and Sophia, what are your career plans like after graduating? Because personally, I am quite interested in like the double major in political science and international development currently. So I was just wondering what you guys are going to do afterwards. And also, would you say knowing French is beneficial or an advantage in McGill? Because that's the one thing that I'm quite nervous about, not knowing any French. Would that hinder any opportunities for me? So those are my questions. Thank you. All the presentations were amazing, by the way.
For sure, thank you. I'll start with the French one because I think that's an easy answer, and then Aishu and I can kind of go back and forth on the graduating careers. So in terms of French, no, you definitely do not need to know French to go to McGill, and I say that because I do not know any French. I picked up very little over my 4 years, and that is my own fault. There are many opportunities to learn French, which I did not take enough advantage of. But that being said, you definitely do not need to know French to go to McGill. Montreal, as a greater whole, obviously you can speak French in it, but everyone speaks English. Everyone's very welcoming and kind. The French stereotype is not true in Montreal. Everyone's super nice, I promise. I think it would be helpful in terms of like getting a job in Montreal, perhaps. But I've had no boundaries personally. I've worked a number of jobs on campus which do not require French. And even in my current role right now, I use French occasionally, but it's not a big deal. It definitely will not affect your opportunities at McGill at all. And then in terms of career plans, so after graduating, I'm going into a master's of security studies with a focus in sub-state violence and terrorism at Georgetown. So that was kind of where I ended up. That is definitely not where I thought I'd end up. I was planning on going to psychology when I came into McGill. So that kind of speaks to the involvement that I've had in my studies. I found there was a lot of research opportunities at McGill, which really shaped where I wanted to go with my career, but also taking on my own opportunities. So I decided to do a thesis, for example, during my degree, which wasn't mandatory, but I wanted to explore security studies more, and that's what really ended up shaping what I went in, or what I'm going into for my master's. So there is no shortage, especially in those 2 degrees. They're some of the biggest faculty or departments within our faculty. So there's no shortage of opportunities to kind of figure out where you want to go with that. I'll pass to Aishu because she's poli-sci and I'm not.
So I'll kind of speak to the French aspect as well. I also do not know French except for like a few phrases. I actually took Spanish all throughout like high school and elementary school. Not really expecting for there to be like a sort of a path for French for me in the future. But I would definitely say, like Sophia said, I don't think not knowing French is a disadvantage in any way at McGill. I've been able to get through all the positions, activities, everything without knowing French. There are a lot of opportunities, like she said, to learn French. And I think that's one thing that's really special at McGill is that they do offer a lot of resources if you do want to learn French. And I'll speak to the career plans after graduating. So I'm in political science, and I do want to go to law school after graduating. So that's kind of something that I've kind of kept throughout my time at McGill, and like from high school, I knew that like I kind of wanted to go to law school, but I think that there are a lot of ways to keep honing that at McGill, including I'm part of the pre-law student society. So that's one way that I've really gotten involved and learned more about law. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to keep even the classes that I've taken too. I'm taking a business law class right now. There's a lot of diverse course offerings that will prepare you for a lot of postgraduate endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question, Samara. Anybody else wants to ask a question? We have a few minutes for Q&A. It can be questions to our presenters. It can be broader questions about McGill. Happy to take any questions. The idea of the presentations, the idea of this webinar was to give you a little bit of a taste of what it's like to be at McGill, with some short lectures by 2 of our profs, and a little bit more of a flavor from the student perspective also on how it looks like to get involved and different career paths, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that was interesting and helpful for all of you as you make your decision. But again, feel free to ask any questions, or if not, I'll just keep rambling for another 5 minutes. Which I can do. I can ramble on and on. Don't worry. Okay, any last words of wisdom from any of my other panelists here? Anything that you would like to add at this point in time? It can be our profs, or students, or staff members. Just one at a time, please. Nelly, yes. What do you want to add, Nelly?
I just wanted to say, Joelle and I are faculty advisors from Arts Oasis, as well as our associate directors here today, Ramesh Vidalvi. And our role is really to help you plan out your degree. And today we talked about discovering the Faculty of Arts, but in a little while, we're gonna be having future orientation sessions about how to register and what to register for. And the main office that you're going to be dealing with is Arts Oasis. So that will be something that will be coming up in future presentations. And in our next presentation, we're probably going to have the dates. I don't know if Joelle has anything else to say about our office or Romesh, but I am going to try to include our website here on our chat
I
line.
just put the last slide with the questions that has our link as well.
You
But
did.
yeah.
Thank you, Manuel.
So let me just say 2 words on Arts Oasis. So the Bachelor of Arts at McGill gives you a lot of choice about which programs you want to pursue. We have many people like Sophia was talking about that come with an idea of studying something and then they switch around to a different program and they explore. And I think that's one of the great things about McGill and about the Faculty of Arts and the Bachelor of Arts. Our faculty advisors and Oasis, as well as departmental advisors, are there to guide you through that process, to guide you through what opportunities are out there in terms of different programs, how you can structure the classes that you're taking in order to ensure that you are completing the right programs at the right pace. Of course, the decisions are yours, right? But there's a number of different people here that can help you sort of make the most out of your time here at McGill. And so that's really what we strive for. And that's really what Oasis is there to do, to help you navigate your university education in the most fruitful way possible for you. Any other words of wisdom?
If I may, I just noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat pertaining to
go for it.
pre-law. Well, I won't answer these. I'll actually turn it over to either Sophia or Aisha to maybe shed some insights that they may have about the pre-law association in particular.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. I'm the VP External at the Pre-Law Students Association. So in terms of some of the events and activities we offer, so we offer admissions events. We had quite a few this year. We had admissions sponsors from Columbia, Dalhousie, U of T, McGill come in and talk to students, get their questions answered. We also host LSAT prep sessions throughout the year, social events to meet other students interested in law, to try to build connections. We have a mentorship program as well, where we pair you up with a practicing lawyer in Montreal or in Canada to learn more about law school, kind of build those connections, because at least for me, I don't really know anybody in law, so it was really helpful for me to be able to build connections in the law field that will help me post-grad. And we recently hosted a panel on women in law as well. So we offer a very diverse range of activities, and you can find that on our Instagram, or also I think we have a website as well. And then I think there's also another question that would you find it beneficial to do a BA before pursuing law? For me, I do find it beneficial. I think that I really wanted to take my time and explore more of undergrad course offerings. I've really enjoyed my time taking classes in political science at McGill and expanding my understanding of the world. I think that I've had a great time just really being able to hone my writing skills, hone my research skills. And I think these are all things that will help me in law school. Otherwise, I think that I would have maybe had a learning gap to kind of adjust over. But for me, it's definitely been worth it or beneficial to do a BA before law school. But yeah, I think that it's always up to different people or up to your student experience as well.
Yeah, so what I would add to that in terms of law school and the BA is that law school is quite specific, right? And you're all very young, and sort of making that decision to dive into something so specific at this point in time, even though it may be the right decision for you, or it may be the path that you think that you want to follow, can be sort of daunting sometimes. And the BA allows you to explore that world, but explore other worlds as well, and make those decisions with a little bit more of a broader background, with a solid foundation in order to sort of explore your interests and make sure that those career choices that you think you want to make right now are actually the right choices for you. So I'd say, so I went to law school. Sorry, I apologize for that. For those of you who have any sort of negative inclinations about lawyers, but in where I come from in Argentina, you have to make that choice right away. And what that meant for me was going to law school and then going to a different path, right? And I think the beauty of this system is that it allows you for that exploration early on. So I would encourage people to take advantage of that opportunity. Anyway, we're at 10:01, out of time. I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank all our panelists and staff members who are here. And thank you all for attending. Again, we have 2 other webinars, one on March 24 at 8 p.m. and one on April 14th at noon, as well as Meet McGill in person April 26th. So looking forward to seeing all of you at more of these events. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Bye, everybody.